I think if we're going to have a smart, meaningful conversation about gun violence in America, we have to stop making it about guns. We have to make it about leadership. Someone has to lead. No one wants to lead the way in drilling a hole in the gun lobby until they fall apart. I think March for Our Lives has done yeoman's work in trying to level that playing field and change the conversation. But I think there's a lack of larger local leadership of people who are willing to say, we are actually done with you and we will fight you until you lose. There's a lack of leadership that happened on the scene in Uvalde where no one was willing to go, this way, follow me. And I feel like it's just such an affront because all someone needed to do, they probably could have saved a lot of lives at Uvalde if one person had said 2 words, follow me. That's all leadership is. It's giving me someone credible to follow. And if they had just gone into the school, lives could have been saved. How much of an analogy, how much of a metaphor is Uvalde for so much of what's going on in our country and in our world today? How many things would be better if someone just said, follow me, and was willing to take the hit? Now, that's the key. I'm not asking people to run into a buzzsaw just so that they can have a trophy or a plaque erected in their honor. I'm not asking for that. But the inability to lead is getting kids killed. And to make it worse, this isn't some kind of an innate leadership that you have to be born with and, all we need to do is bombard you with Vita rays and you turn into Captain America. This is a training issue. Leadership can be taught. Some people are born leaders, but everyone can become a leader. All you have to do is know to say, follow me, and chart a good direction. Children died because no one was willing to say, follow me. Wow. So that's the new question. Is it just going to be youth groups like March for Our Lives, or I'm kind of curious to see what they have had to say about all of this. Let me just look at their socials and see what they've had to say. I don't believe they have posted today. I don't see that they've posted anything recently, no. Although they did post or pin a post from a couple of days ago where they held a walkout in the state of Iowa at the state capitol to protest the lack of action, as they see it, on gun violence. This was around the time where we were talking about the Iowa caucuses. And to hand a letter, according to March for Our Lives, hand a letter to Iowa's governor, Kim Reynolds, saying that, in their words, our lives are worth more than guns. Kids deserve better. These are the kids who are the legacy of the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, who survived that shooting and decided to take very intense social action, civic action, where they put together the march in Washington, D.C., and really just kind of put a very intense, full-throated conversation together about the fact that we are not willing to kind of lead on this. Now, I am absolutely not asking anyone to violate the Second Amendment. It's the law. It's a constitutional amendment. I have firearms owners in my family. I have law enforcement in my family. So the laws need to be abided. The issue is who's going to lead on keeping kids safe. That's kind of the bigger problem. And the fact that no one did, wow, that is remarkable. But it's a lack of leadership. Who's going to lead? Who's going to stand up and say, I got a plan, follow me, and actually see it through? Now, again, this is another one of those reasons why multi-agency training is a problem. You heard Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, say that the agencies who responded had not trained together. The problem there is that no one could say, follow me, because the response to that would have been, who are you? That's the other issue. They got to know you and trust you to follow you. So it's not just a lack of leadership and a lack of training. It's a lack of relationships. It's a lack of relationship building that would have allowed in that moment for someone to stand up and lead and say, okay, we're going this way. And everyone just follows. And that takes time. That's why kids got killed. Because grown-ups didn't bother to get to know one another and work together soon enough to save the lives of children. When you put it that way, it almost makes their deaths worse. It makes them feel even more preventable. Well, we can't prevent people from being crazy, but we can prevent people from being lame. We can prevent people from being, we can't prevent crazy. We can prevent lazy. How about that? I can't fix crazy. I can damn sure do something about lazy. I can do something about adults who won't get off their ass and do their job. I can do something about adults who won't get proper training and work together. I can do something about adults who think that they can lead but really don't understand looking wise and acting otherwise. That's something I can do something about. Don't talk to me about crazy. Mental health is such a crisis in the country. Yeah, and that's not the whole. This is not a problem of crazy. It's a problem of lazy. That's why those kids are dead. That's why those teachers are dead. Because enough people were allowed to be lazy for a long enough time that nobody led. And on the day when leaders were needed, where could you, does anyone, what time nothing. Remarkable. When they went to questions, someone asked Attorney General Merrick Garland what needs to be done now. He laid out a couple of recommendations. They're pretty simple things. They I hate to retread what we've been talking about for the last little while, but here is what the Attorney General said in terms of next steps. I'll also get into the report, and we can look at some of the next steps that are in the report, but here's what the Attorney General said.
The most significant failure, and therefore the most significant and urgent thing for law enforcement to do, is active shooter training, which provides that when an active shooter is in a building or anywhere else, the first is to stop that shooter and to remove people who are immediately endangered by that shooter. And that requires tactical training. That's the first thing. Say the second thing is critical incident response. Establishing who's going to be the on-site commander, making clear to all other agencies that that person will be the on-site commander. That again requires training and practice in response. I think it's absolutely necessary that any circumstance where there's going to be more than one agency responding, and that's going to be in any school situation, all the possible agencies should train together in order to establish lines of communication, command structure, and communications structure in particular. Here radios were not interactive. People did not have a way to talk to each other, and make sure that everybody's following the same strategy.
That's Attorney General Merrick Garland speaking today. So yeah, if anything maybe is hopeful in all of this, it seems like the issues that caused these deaths in Uvalde, Texas are not insurmountable. That at least is good news. That there were things that needed to be done differently that weren't done properly, but they could be done correctly. There's nothing that's so far beyond the reach of officials that it simply can't be done right. This is all fixable. This is all correctable. And that's a good thing. That at least gives me a little bit of hope that this can be not only prevented in Uvalde or places like it, but anywhere across the country. You may not be able to prevent the attack, but you can prevent the ineptitude that let the attack go on longer than it had to. That's good news. I should note also that there are additional investigations into what happened in Uvalde that are not done. There is a piece from the Texas Tribune, which is a fantastic news organization that covers the entire state of Texas, an independent nonprofit newsroom that does fabulous, fabulous work, including in the aftermath of the Uvalde shooting. And they put out a piece just today about the additional investigations that have yet to be completed. A number of you asked about the limits of what the Department of Justice can do. Texas has an enormous law enforcement infrastructure, huge, but the wheels of that are still spinning. According to the Texas Tribune, at least 3 separate investigations into the massacre at Robb Elementary have not yet been released. Remember, the shooting happened in May of 2022, including records from the Texas Department of Public Safety, a criminal investigation from the Uvalde County District Attorney's Office, and the City of Uvalde's independent investigation. More than a dozen news organizations, including the Texas Tribune, have sued the Department of Public Safety, alleging that the state police have unlawfully withheld those records, which include body camera footage and emergency communications. A Travis County State District judge ordered last November that the DPS release the records within 20 days. Attorney General Ken Paxton filed an appeal on behalf of the agency on December 8th, so that case remains ongoing. Part of the investigation was, continuing to quote from the Texas Tribune, part of that investigation was a medical analysis to determine whether any of those killed at Robb Elementary might have survived if police and medicalists arrived sooner. Records obtained by the Washington Post, the Texas Tribune, and ProPublica show that communication lapses among medical responders delayed treatment for victims. 4 victims had heartbeats when they were rescued from the school and died later that day. That is why the Attorney General's report is so significant, because we know that there were other bits of evidence that showed a huge lapse in the quality of the response at Uvalde. And now, the greater detail, that clip that I played from Vanita Gupta about what happened after the shooting was over, after the shooter was dead, lays more foundation for the argument that there is something to see here. And why we haven't seen it yet remains to be clarified. The Texas Tribune adds, DPS's Chief Medical Officer Mark Escott, who also serves as EMS Medical Director for the city of Austin, said in a statement that the Uvalde DA's office informed him last August that they were moving in a different direction and no longer wanted the medical analysis. Why not? Wouldn't you want to know the rest of that? Wouldn't you want to follow that up, finish that up? I can't understand why they would not want that, but I don't know. Now, according to the Tribune, the DA in Uvalde County already got those records. They say, or she says, they will be used to conduct a criminal investigation. Her office has said it would use the report from the Texas Rangers, which is an investigative arm within the Department of Public Safety, to determine whether to charge anyone with a crime. Mitchell, the district attorney, Christina Mitchell, has supported the state's position of not publicly releasing those records, arguing that disclosing them could jeopardize any criminal charges. Mitchell did not respond to a request for comment, and her office has yet to file any criminal charges. I guess I understand that argument, but that's always law enforcement's argument. We can't tell you anything because we might prosecute. Well, what the hell are you waiting for? Get cracking. They died almost 2 years ago. What's the delay? I hope the Texas Tribune gets those records. Certainly don't want to see an investigation impeded, but what are you waiting for? Either you're prosecuting or you're not. Get to it. But I find that interesting. They have the data, that the DA has the data and would not release it. Now, theoretically, if the DA decided to use those data, they would come out in court anyway because they would have to be published as part of the criminal justice process. We would get those documents anyway, unless the court decided to redact them, which is also possible. The state could decide to redact them. Just because you request a public record doesn't mean you're going to get it, and it doesn't mean that they cannot black some of it out. But this is a material piece of what happened, and it also lends more, or the report from the US Department of Justice, I think, answers more questions, or raises more questions in terms of, well, what are we going to do now? So hopefully this will strengthen the argument for releasing these documents. LWGSL writes, does the report address why photos of the dead kids weren't released? We see the same from Gaza. Does the report mention how the recognition of an AR on the scene affected the response? I don't think it mentioned about the AR, but they go on to write, could the bodies of Sandy Hook victims have shamed Republicans into supporting gun control? Yes, I know that some parents at both locations didn't want their children's bodies on view. Blur them out. I hear that. And then Sarah responded, if they start with that horror, where would it end? Televising executions? I see where both of you are coming from, and I understand the question. What I have found is that the minute we show you something like that, you become immediately desensitized to it because you've seen it and your heart didn't explode and you're still alive. So the second time you see it, it won't have the same impact. It can't have the same impact. It has to hit a little harder and a little harder and a little harder. And that's why I think the video of George Floyd being killed by the former police officer Derek Chauvin was so powerful. There was no more visceral way to present that than with the body camera footage in HD, uncut. That's why Derek Chauvin's conviction was a certainty. We all saw the exact same thing at the exact same time in the exact same way. And there was no question of what we saw. That really happened. And when it really happened, the whole country was like, oh my God, bury him under the jail. It was over. From that moment, it was over. But when we're talking about killing children, I mean, think about what we're talking about. We're talking about killing children. I might feel differently about releasing that tape if I could think of something more horrific than murdered children, than children being gunned down. Because then the sensitivity to it would at least exist in a continuum where I haven't lopped the top off of the scale. I cannot think of anything worse than somebody's little child being shot dead in cold blood, in malice. What's worse than that? To me, that's the top of the scale. So if you cut the top of that off, then is it meaningless? It kind of loses some of its meaning. You pull that Overton window too far, and then day becomes night and nothing makes sense. So I would be very careful about it. I would be extraordinarily cautious about showing anything that graphic. I think sometimes it's unavoidable, and sometimes it just kind of happens because in the back of news coverage, it just sort of occurs and we can't control it, especially live news. I think that something like, say, the January 6th insurrection, that's something we probably can show in the clear because we all watched it happen. And so many people were part of it. That's a different situation. I don't want to see anybody get shot dead. Like, I don't want to see the moment that somebody dies. That's too much. But I don't know if it would actually solve anything. It might actually make things worse. It might make them harder to solve because now, well, we're used to what we've seen, so now we're used to the atrocity even more than we were. We got used to it when we talked about it. Now we get used to it when we look at it. So we're even more desensitized to it and even less fired up to do anything about it. I think it would have the opposite effect. What we need to do is just do something. We've had enough information. We've had enough time. Either do something about it or just accept that you're willing to live in an America where children get shot. One of the two. But I don't need any more sensitization. I've got the information. I know what the problem is. Do something or don't. Put up or shut up. But no one needs any more evidence. Either we're going to protect our children or we're not. What's it going to be? I just noticed your comment higher up, Holly. Holly writes, is can't fix crazy, let's fix lazy the next merch? Maybe. That's not a terrible idea. I can work on it. I can work on that. We can't fix crazy. Let's fix lazy. Because you know what? I think that's a more hopeful message. I think in the face of all these things that we cannot do anything about, let's act on the things we can. Let's do the things we are able to do. I think that's where people get tripped up because there's no one solution. That's why, for those of you who are new to the program, that's why I called this show The Nightlight, because everyone for the last few years that I have dealt with has been so consumed in worry over the darkness in this country that they feel. And they're wondering, like, what's going to dispel the darkness? I can't make the sun come up, but I can shine right where I am. I can light my little corner. And if you light yours, and if they light theirs, then we'll make it through the night until the sun does rise. It will. We can't force it. But we have more light to be shined than we give ourselves credit for. And if we each take that initiative wherever we are, if we each do what we can and stop panicking over what we cannot do, you'd be amazed how much things brighten and how quickly. That's what the Nightlight is all about. And that's what I believe. I believe we have more capacity to shine than we give ourselves credit for. You don't have to dispel the darkness. You can't make the sun come up. But what can you do? I'll do what I can. You do what you can. And then someday we together, all of us, across every cultural divide and every political line, all of us together will have the pleasure, side by side, of watching the sunrise on all of us. That's the idea.